Juneau, land of primeval seascapes and towering peaks, of magnificent glaciers, of gold and greed, of forests and fish, of totems and tourists, of government practiced by rugged individualists. Juneau, lush land of contradictions. Juneau is unique among America's capital cities. Covering 3,000 square miles, Juneau is distinguished by sheer size. It's surely the only state capital featuring a glacier within the city limits. For millennia, this region has been shaped by earthquakes, glaciers, wind, and sea. Juneau lies in a realm of fjords in the shadow of an ice field the size of Rhode Island. It perches on a remote strip of North America known as the Southeast Alaska Panhandle. A crazy quilt of islands, mountains, waterways, and forests. Threaded through the maze is Alaska's Inside Passage, a sheltered route plied by cruise ships, fishing boats, pleasure craft, freight-laden barges, and the ferries of Alaska's marine highway system. As the Little Ice Age ended and the ice receded, the first people settled here. They were the ancestors of the Tlingit people.
Shukanach Tlenitioya has Kawaha has chairs awasayat Zantikini use awasa. Aya has the Koyan Kastushat Kian Tsukuziti, Ushkitan.
This was an abundant land, and the people conceived a rich culture. The area that would become the towns of Juneau and Douglas was the site of the Auk and Taku Tlingit communities. The first white men with whom they had contact were English. Captain George Vancouver explored the Gastineau Channel in 1794. In Sitka, the Russians established a permanent settlement. It became the capital of Russian America, and for a time the largest city on the coast. Contact with these newcomers tested the resiliency of the native people. The white men brought smallpox and other diseases to which the Tlingit had no immunity. When U.S. Secretary of State William Henry Seward purchased Alaska from the Russians in 1867, the change in flags had little effect on the Tlingit people of the Gastineau Channel. What did affect their way of life forever was gold. The quest for gold that began in California quickly spread north, led by prospectors with gold pans. The first big gold discoveries in the north occurred in British Columbia. By 1879, the first gold mining and milling operation in Alaska had been established near Sitka by German engineer George Pills. It quickly proved a failure, and Pills sought new opportunities. He had heard two reports that suggested there could be gold near the future city of Juneau. One came from naturalist John Muir, among the earliest tourists to visit the glacier now called Mendenhall. Muir was no prospector, but he knew something about geology. He noted the mineralized character of the shore. But it was an important leader from an Auk Tlingit village who literally led the gold seekers to Juneau. His name was Cowie. Pills hired a pair of prospectors newly arrived from the gold fields of British Columbia, Joseph Juneau and Richard Harris. Grubstaked them and sent them to meet Cowie on the Gastineau Channel. They found placer gold in a nearby stream. Richard Harris.
We named the creek Gold Creek, and it was the best prospect we had found on the trip.
Later that year, the pair made a second trip to the Gastineau Channel. This time, again guided by local natives, they climbed upstream to the place now called Silver Bow Basin.
We examined several quartz lodes that cropped out on the edges of the gulch, and I broke some with a hammer, and Juneau and myself could hardly believe our eyes. We knew it was gold, but so much, and not in particles. Streaks running through the rocks and little lumps as large as peas or beans.
It was the first big gold strike in Alaska. Word of the discovery quickly spread. The Juneau Gold Rush was underway. By snowfall, claims had been staked all along the creek, but freezing weather postponed further work until spring. About 40 miners spent that first winter of 1880-81 camped at what is now the corner of Front and Franklin Streets. Harris and Juneau platted a town site that would grow into Alaska's first new city since the Alaska Purchase. Buildings quickly sprang up, including cabins, stores, and saloons. The miners alternately christened their town Pillsburg, Harrisburg, Juneau, and Rockwell. When the U.S. Post Office insisted that they settle on one name, the miners chose Juneau. The name Harris remained attached to the local mining district. By spring, steamships regularly visited the area, bringing supplies and more fortune seekers. And that summer, the first excursionists came up the Inside Passage to gaze at glaciers, icebergs, and the gold rush. Activity that first year wasn't confined to the mainland. Other prospectors worked their diggings on Douglas Island. One of the early arrivals was John Treadwell, who bought a claim there for $400 and ushered in the era of hard rock mining. The enormous gold deposits along the Gastineau Channel were encased in rock. The ore was vast in quantity, but extremely low in grade. Treadwell miners had to work 10 tons of ore to extract a single ounce of gold. Their mining and milling operations had to be huge to achieve the economies of scale required to yield a profit. By the turn of the 20th century, the Treadwell Mining Complex was Alaska's largest industrial enterprise, with 4 mines and 5 mills. Neighboring Douglas was Alaska's largest city.
It was the world's largest gold mine in its day and age. It was extremely profitable. 42% of the gold they produced, they paid out in dividends. There are much richer mines throughout the world and throughout mining history that never paid anywhere near the dividends Treadwell did.
In Juneau, prospectors were still at work with picks, shovels, wheelbarrows, and sluice boxes. The man who made placer mining pay had to combine these tools with the hardest kind of work for 12 or 14 hours a day during a mining season that endured 5 to 6 months. Within a decade, the loose or placer gold was gone. One by one, the prospectors sold their claims. Many of them, including Juneau, moved on, lured by the dream of richer diggings elsewhere. Unwittingly, even as they departed, the placermen ended up bringing a second gold rush to Juneau by pioneering gold discoveries farther north. Juneau was the hub of civilization for the Klondikers of the Yukon Gold Rush of the late 1890s. Canadian Mounties required prospectors headed over Chilkoot Pass and into the Yukon wilderness to pack a ton of supplies to see them through the winter. Juneau supplied their goods, their rest and relaxation, and their winter employment. By 1900, what began as a mining camp had become incorporated as a city. Juneau had electricity long before most of the United States. Both Juneau and Douglas had telephone service and capable volunteer fire departments, bustling downtown business districts, even hospitals. Congress declared that Alaska was now a territory, with Juneau, Alaska's economic and population center, as its capital. With corporate mining, government, and commerce came men who worked for salaries, together with their families. One early cabin in turn served as a church, a school, and a brewery office. Soon there were both public and Catholic schools for white children. Separate schools were established for natives, some run by missionaries who taught in English and punished any student who spoke a word of his or her own language. The community's St. Nicholas Orthodox Church suggests the era of Russian Alaska, except that no Russians played a role in Juneau history. The church was built by local Tlingit people in conjunction with Serbian miners who missed the Orthodox faith of their homelands. By 1929, the congregation consisted primarily of local natives. Juneau and Douglas became extraordinary melting pots. A 1903 survey defined the population as 25% American, 25% Scandinavian, 25% Austrian and Slovenian, and the remainder a blend of European, Japanese, Chinese, and Tlingit. Across the channel from Juneau, the Treadwell complex and Douglas were thriving. For more than a decade, Douglas and Juneau vied for the title of Alaska's largest city. Together, they had become the undisputed gold mining capital of the world. In the early years, the Treadwell complex practiced open-pit mining, and the Glory Hole measured 1,720 feet long by 420 feet wide by 450 feet to the snow that lay atop pillars left to support the walls. Soon, the veins of gold-bearing quartz led the miners beneath the surface. Their mules lived in underground stables and never saw the light of day. Hard rock mining technology reached its zenith at Treadwell in 1899, when the complex unveiled a 300-stamp mill that was the largest in the world. The stamps thundered 24 hours per day, 363 days per year. When they fell silent on Christmas Day and the 4th of July, residents complained they had a hard time sleeping. Treadwell lured the world's best miners with the highest wages in the industry and benefits rivaling those of the present day. In addition to perquisites like stock options and health care, they enjoyed billiards, rugby, basketball, baseball, and swimming in the natatorium, Alaska's first indoor pool. Miners could swim every day but Friday, when the pool was reserved for women. The company also provided a reading and writing room stocked with over 150 magazines and newspapers in several languages, and a library with 15,000 volumes. At the 4th of July banquet in 1908, single miners could choose among 2 meats, 2 vegetables, 3 desserts, cigars, cigarettes, coffee, and tea. By the dawn of World War I, the Treadwell mines had been reduced to working very low-grade ore. In search of better diggings, the miners began undercutting the pillars that supported the shafts. On April 20th, 1917, the building that housed the natatorium began to crumble. The following day, 3 of the 4 mines collapsed, idling 2,000 men. The stamp mills of Douglas Island, once the foremost in the world, would soon be forever silenced. Some of the displaced miners went to the trenches of World War I, while others crossed the channel to the Juneau side, where more mining history was being made. The catalyst was a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley named Bartlett Lee Thane. Though he ultimately died broke, Thane revolutionized mining with the Alaska Gastineau mine.
He was the first to build a thin arch dam for hydropower. He was the first to do a lake tap at Annex Creek for hydropower. He drove the longest tunnel at the fastest rate anybody had ever driven a tunnel. He built a revolutionary new mill that today, when you go to a mill in Alaska, like Red Dogs up in Kotzebue or Greens Creek out on Admiralty Island, you see Bart Thane's mill.
Rather than rely on the old-fashioned stamp mill, Thane conceived a rotating tube milling technology that boosted production to 10,000 tons per day. To maintain that output, he needed more power and looked to Annex Creek, 15 miles away. In another unprecedented feat of engineering, Thane's men blasted a hole upward through the bottom of the lake that fed the creek, using gravity to transport water to the powerhouse by means of a 2-mile-long tunnel. 42 minutes after the blast, the water wheels at Annex Creek began turning. They have never stopped. World War I Post-war inflation and a gold price of $20 an ounce diminished the fortunes of Thane's Alaska Gastineau mine. Avalanches wiped out the facility's Sheep Creek Railway in 1917. The operation would never recover. If Thane was the most ambitious mining man in Juneau's history, Fred Bradley was its most successful.
F.W. Bradley, Frederick Worthen Bradley, certainly the greatest mining man to ever come to Alaska.
The Alaska Juneau gold mine in Silver Bow Basin began as a seasonal operation with a 30-stamp mill. In 1910, Bradley gambled and drove the Gold Creek Tunnel from Last Chance Basin to the Gastineau Channel to provide year-round access to the AJ. In 1916, Bradley's directors convinced him to build a new facility based on Thane's revolutionary design. When it opened in 1917, it was a disastrous failure. On its best day, it processed just 3,000 tons of ore at 3 times the projected cost. The complex began losing $30,000 per month. It was 1917, and Juneau faced its darkest hour. Most of the Treadwell shafts were flooded. World War I had taken the miners away. Thane's operation was near collapse, and the vaunted AJ was a financial catastrophe. Bradley would not give up. He redesigned the AJ mill until it practiced bulk mining on a scale never seen before. Ultimately, the site would yield 13,000 tons of ore per day. AJ miners carved more miles of tunnel into Mount Roberts than there are miles of road in Juneau. By 1928, the AJ employed 1,000 miners, earning the highest wages in the industry. They extracted a mere ounce of gold for each 20 tons of ore blasted from the earth. In the history of mining, no one but Bradley had ever made a profit on ore so low in grade. Not all mining was large-scale. Members of the Peterson family typified the independent miners of the Juneau Gold Belt with a difference. Most of the time, it was the family's 2 daughters who worked their small hard rock mine. And not all of life in Juneau was mining. Other significant industries were salmon and halibut fishing, fish canning, cold storage, fur and dairy farming, tourism, and government. President Warren G. Harding visited Juneau, and local residents greeted his entourage enthusiastically despite the rainy day. So did Will Rogers and Wiley Post on their ill-fated attempt to fly around the world in 1935. Aviation took to the air and waters of Alaska as if they were meant for each other. Bush pilots linked the communities of southeast Alaska, and the Pan Am Clipper brought commercial traffic from the south. In the latter stages of World War II, the Manpower Conservation Act forced the closure of the AJ. The operators mothballed the mine, assuming it would reopen as soon as the soldiers came home. It never did, and Juneau's tenure as a world-class mining center was over. The war brought the outside world and unprecedented changes to Alaska and its capital. Because of its proximity to Japan, Alaska was considered part of the Pacific Front. Japanese Alaskans were sent to internment camps. In 1942, internment left Juneau High School class valedictorian John Tanaka, a Japanese American, unable to address his classmates. Excursion Inlet near Juneau briefly served as the site of a German prisoner of war camp. Aleut natives were forcibly relocated from their Aleutian Island homes to makeshift camps in abandoned southeast Alaska fish canneries. But in all respects, Alaska natives were treated as second-class citizens until the end of World War II. Native Alaskans could go to war, but not into Juneau bars, movie theaters, or many restaurants. It wasn't until 1924 that Alaska natives were declared citizens and gained the right to vote. For decades, the Tlingit and Haida in the southern part of the southeast panhandle watched as the mining and fishing industries infringed upon traditional subsistence lifestyles and lands. The Alaska Native Brotherhood and Alaska Native Sisterhood were founded to fight for Native civil rights. For years, as Grand President of the ANS, Elizabeth Peratrovich lobbied tirelessly for the passage of the territory's Anti-Discrimination Act. The bill passed. It was 1945. In 1959, Alaska became a state. Judge Tom Stewart was one of the authors of the Alaska Constitution. Like most Alaskans, he was anxious to see the end of the region's territorial status.
The federal government had a tight grip on Alaska. We paid income tax just like any other citizen of the United States. But we couldn't vote for the president. We had no representation in the Congress except the delegate, and he did not have a vote. And consequently, Alaska got short shrift.
In Washington, D.C., Congress argued the question of admitting Alaska and Hawaii as the 49th and 50th members of the Union. Alaskans voted overwhelmingly for statehood, and on January 3, 1959, President Eisenhower signed the proclamation admitting Alaska to the Union.
There was joy in Alaska. Here in Juneau, for example, we went down to the front of the Capitol and rang the Liberty Bell. There were 7 people chosen to ring the bell 7 times to make 49 clangs on that Liberty Bell. I was the last of the 7. In my judgment, the first 6 swung the clapper timidly. I got hold of that and laid into that bell. You could hear it over the whole town.
Jubilation marked the raising of the 49-star flag in front of the Juneau Memorial Building at 4th and Main Streets, where it still flies today. In 1977, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act compensated Alaska Natives with land and money for what was taken during the era of white encroachment. This effort had started in 1924 by the newly formed Tlingit-Haida Central Council. The local regional corporation, Sea Alaska, manages many acres of valuable land. Its nonprofit arm, Sea Alaska Heritage Foundation, supports educational and cultural activities, such as the biannual celebration. Gold Belt Corporation serves shareholders registered in the Juneau area. Just as the little ferries of the turn of the century were replaced by the Douglas Bridge, and Douglas and Juneau merged into one community, modern Juneau is well connected to the rest of the world by jet service, marine transportation, and telecommunications. Today's principal industries are government and tourism. Mining, which still goes on, served as the economic foundation of the city for more than 65 years. It still supports Juneau, but in a different way. Much of the flat land around the downtown core consists of fill from the AJ mine, while Sandy Beach in Douglas is built on fill from the Treadwell. Hiking trails trace the miners' footsteps and wagon tracks through the surrounding hills, while locals and tourists in Juneau's downtown historic district frequent one of the only gold rush towns that still endures from the age of Alaska Yukon gold.
This hat was my grandmother's, my father's sister, Achilko. That's my grandmother. The shells are dentalium. And then the beads are trade beads, Russian trade beads. They're called Russian faceted beads. Ceremonial cap, probably she was probably honored with it. In Tlingit, her name was Jiatlach, and she was Tlukakadi, like myself, Tlukakadi group, and came from Haines area, from Qisanhit, the Mount Rapinski house. And she was married to a man in Berners Bay. And when she was ill after her husband died, she was in the hospital. And when she passed away, brought her things to the museum.